Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, and my co-host Justin Baker and I are joining each other via Skype as we attempt to knock out the rest of, all four divisions, the new divisions that have been formulated just for this year, and we are going to break down each team. But before we do that, we want to just kind of give a little bit of a breakdown of everything that has kind of changed for this 56-game season. And just kind of where new teams kind of fall into what division, and of course the new Canadian division that's going to happen, and some of the new rules with team rosters and all that, and then we will on this episode do the Central Division, which is a new Central Division. It's like half the teams from the Central Division. It's like old school Central Division plus a few teams, 8 teams per division, other than the Canadian division, right? The Canadian division has 7. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. So much easier for Canadian teams to make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, pretty much.
Guaranteed 4 playoff teams for Canadians. So the Central Division, I think is probably, honestly, in terms of the realignment, I think is maybe the most exciting because it brings back quite a few rivalries.
I mean, you look at that old Western Conference, right? So there you go, when Detroit was still there.
Well, and I love the possibility of, like you've got Nashville, Detroit, Dallas, Detroit, Chicago, Detroit is a big one that I mean, that's probably the biggest downside to the Red Wings moving to the Eastern Conference is the lack of a Wings Blackhawks rivalry. They only get to play each other twice a year usually, and this year we're going to get to see them play 7 times, so that'll be fun. And on top of that, just there is a chance here that some teams from last year that we maybe would have written off for a playoff spot, you never know in these shortened seasons what's going to happen, because if a team gets hot, they're in the playoffs. Like you can guarantee yourself, if you have a nice 10-15 game stretch where you pick up, out of 30 points in a 15 game stretch, you pick up 25. I mean, you're almost securing yourself a playoff spot just in that stretch. Like, you can do a lot for yourself in a short amount of time because there really isn't much ground to make up. So it'll be interesting to see, can a team like Detroit, maybe a team like LA or San Jose, like teams that struggled last year, could they go on a little bit of a run and kind of turn this thing around? But in terms of the actual divisions itself, anything that you felt like you were disappointed in?
To be quite honest, I don't know if I would say disappointed. I think, when, for example, like when I look at the Central Division, I last year as a Detroit fan, you kind of look at it and you say, okay, they're clearly at the bottom of the East. They're going to be one of the teams that's going to be, obviously looking to rebuild. And then on the West, you had a team like Chicago, right? They were kind of getting towards the bottom as well. And I feel like they're going to, maybe soon be the next Detroit team where they've dumped off their goaltending. There's rumors already of their, Patrick Kane and Taves maybe, being shopped a little bit. So you've got this team in the West that's going to be potentially at the bottom. And now all of a sudden they're kind of shuffled up a little bit, right? So now you have, these 2 teams at the bottom. Now they're in the same division, right? So a team like maybe Ottawa, who's, maybe looking to bounce back, or a team like, Buffalo, for example, right? There's another team that's looking to bounce back. And now they get stuck in this super tough East division where I think, again, it's probably going to be, a team where any from 1 to 7 in that division could, finish at the top or potentially at the bottom. So there's a lot of question marks going into each one of these divisions. And I think, with realignment and you only playing the teams in your division, you could have these potential, Detroit, Chicago games where maybe if, Detroit has Chicago's number, when you play them 9 times in a season, that's a lot of points to be gained, where Detroit could potentially vault themselves into a playoff spot if, Chicago goes on a little bit of a bad run. And, for example, you have Tampa Bay and Dallas and the 2 Stanley Cup, contending teams here. What if they end up playing each other and now you have one team hot, one team not? And guess what? Now a team like Dallas that we thought could contend for a cup is now basically at the bottom of the division.
Yeah, the weirdest thing has to be Dallas and Tampa in the same division. Like, they played each other in the Stanley Cup Finals. They could play each other in the first round in these playoffs, which honestly isn't unlikely. I mean, when you look at that division, which to me maybe it's a toss up between the West and the Central. Which one's the worst division? I mean, Dallas and Tampa, obviously they went to the finals, so you're kind of giving the nod to like a little bump to the Central. But I mean, Florida, Detroit, Chicago, Carolina should be pretty good. But it just kind of is in some ways this division where like all the rest of the teams kind of got thrown in there. But anyways, I think it's going to make things interesting. But the East Division is insane. I feel bad for everyone in that division.
Yeah, I do too. And like, the other team I look at too, Vegas Golden Knights, right? When they were playing that Pacific Division, you kind of thought of them as the cream of the crop, right? They probably came into this season before all the realignment expecting to be right there at the top. And now you've got to go into a division with St. Louis, Colorado, two teams that are going to be right up there. So now it's like, okay, well, Vegas will be lucky if they finish in 3 or 4 at this spot. I
mean, the other St. Louis to me is a little bit of a question mark, though. I mean, we'll get to St. Louis when we talk about the West.
Right.
We won't dive too deep into that. Let's go through just some of the rules for rosters with the taxi squad, and obviously there needs to be extra players available to these teams so that in case something happens to somebody tests positive, they've got these guys sitting in the wings. Explain a little bit about what the changes will mean.
Yeah, so for those who haven't read anything, there's basically what's referred to as the new taxi squad, right? So basically with the $81.5 million cap situation, you have to have your 23-man roster that you normally would in any other given year, right? But now teams will be required to carry an additional 4 to 6 players who don't count against the cap, but basically these guys will be, guys that you can plug right into the lineup immediately should anything happen COVID related, right? Again, and that also includes the new goalie requirement, which is basically where teams will be required to have 3 goaltenders, whether that's 2 on your normal 23-man roster and 1 on your, your taxi squad, or whether that's all 3 right on your 23-man roster. But basically, this, again, kind of helps figure out the situation so we don't have to use emergency goalies as much. Don't have to make call-ups, that sort of thing. Kind of eliminates the need for people to travel and, not be with the squad full-time, basically.
Yeah, I wonder with the goalie rule if it's something that will actually stay. If they say, you know what, every team just needs to have 3 goalies, and the one goalie won't count against your 23-man roster, won't count against the cap or something.
Yeah, that is something I could see long term because, again, don't get me wrong, it's always great to see that emergency goalie story, and what was it with Carolina and Toronto last year?
Yeah, suck my balls.
I mean, those are always fun and cool. Of course. Fun and cool stories. But again, I think as a team, it's better to have those 3 goaltenders. Just because, again, if one goes down, and we see it all the time where guys go in to practice, right, the morning of or the warm-up skating, a goaltender pulls a groin or something fluky happens. It just occurs, and so it's just nice to have that, that reassurance, that backup goaltender there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just seems to make sense to have. I don't know. I'm not so worried about the emergency goalie that he goes in and he does amazing. Like that is a few and far between. I think we've seen it twice in the last 3 or 4 years where emergency goalie actually gets some playing time and he played okay. I think it's more so, what happens if this guy has to go in and he gets shelled?
Right.
That's annoying too. Either that or every team should have to designate one of their players as a goaltender. That would be fun too.
Yeah, that would be great.
That's how they used to do it. That's how they used to do it because teams only had one goalie, and then the coach would go in or something goalie.
I know.
Okay, so I mean, essentially, teams get to carry extra guys. it's not like they can. I think there's some rules against where you can dump salary onto that 4 to 6 man. Like, you can't just go, oh, this guy's expensive, let's just dump him onto that one so he doesn't count against the cap. That stuff has been all worked out, so you can't do that. So
sure.
Okay, well let's go to the Carolina Hurricanes to start this Central Division, a team that I think is definitely looking at the division that they're in. I got to imagine that they will see this as an opportunity for themselves. Really, this division walks through the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think everyone else in here is beatable, including the Dallas Stars, who went to the Stanley Cup Final. I see the Dallas Stars a little bit more as that was their one-off, kind of like the Sharks. The Sharks went to the Stanley Cup Final in 2016, and it's not like they went back. They didn't really get close to going back. I know the Sharks lost in the second round 2 years ago. I don't see this team as a perennial Stanley Cup finalist. I think it'll be a relative one-off in my mind. I just the way that the rest of the team is aging. You've got Radulov 34, Pavelski's 36. Jamie Benn's 31, and he looked good in the playoffs, but in the regular season looked really sluggish. It's really it all goes through Sagan, and you've got some different guys down the pipeline. But on defense, they're great, but at the same time, you could see this team losing in the first round. I don't think that they're like Tampa, where we say everything goes through this team.
No. I absolutely agree. I think, obviously Tampa is the cream of the crop when it comes to this division. And Dallas, again, this is don't get me wrong. They had a good run last year, but I do agree with you. I do think it is more or less of I don't want to say a fluke, because I do think they still have some talent there, but you had a lot of guys playing at their best. I mean, Khudobin's a great backup goaltender, but I would have never guessed that he was going to play as well as he did last year. Jamie Benn, another guy who, has had a few down years, and suddenly, even regular season wasn't playing hot, but comes in and has a tremendous playoff run. Same with Pavelski, just mediocre. Corey Perry, same deal. Older guys who just didn't get it done regular season, but playoffs just showed up. And so, again, I just don't see that happening again this time around. Whether or not they have better regular seasons is another story. But, again, I just, think this team, like you said, runs through Sagan, runs through Ben Bishop and their goaltending. And so, with new head coach here, maybe they open up the offense a little bit more. Maybe they, start scoring some more goals this season. But I think it kind of caught everybody off guard in the playoffs. And I think, teams will be a little bit more prepared, a little bit ready for what, Dallas has.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not to say that Dallas is a bad team. But
no.
In terms of for Carolina, you have to be looking at this even with everything running through Tampa Bay. Kucherov is out for at least the regular season, with a hip surgery that he just had or that he's having. I can't remember which of them, but he's out for the regular season. So you got to think that this division is so wide open. And if there's one team that you go, oh, this team is better than a lot of people have really given them credit for. They've got some nice depth up the middle with Aho and Jordan Staal and Vincent Trocheck could all play up the middle. They and Ryan Dzingel, they could really do some damage. And when all is said and done, this team could be the Central Division champ. Well, at least the team at the end of the regular season that finishes first in the Central Division.
Yeah, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities when you talk about a Carolina. We know they have a lot of talent. They have a load of talent back on the back end in terms of defense. Dougie Hamilton's going to be up for a new contract, so what kind of season are you going to get out of him? And I think obviously Carolina would love to extend him. And,
you're going to get a fantastic season out of a guy. Dougie Hamilton going, all right, I can get paid next year.
Right.
This is it right here for you. I mean, this is his last big contract. And if he goes out and before he got hurt last year, he was in the running for the Norris Trophy. I mean, he was having a fantastic year, 40 points in 47 games, 14 goals. He would have scored 20 goals, no doubt, had he played a full season. he would have gotten pretty darn close to probably 25 to 30 even, and 70 points. So he had a great season. You got to think that he's eyeballing a nice $7.5, $8 million, maybe more dollar contract depending on the year that he has this year. Especially for a right-handed D. I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of what some teams might be willing to give. Now, we don't totally know what the landscape will look like in 6 months from now when free agency happens, or 7 months from now. I know it's weird to talk about free agency so close when the regular season hasn't even started, but it's true. I agree. Carolina certainly would love to extend Dougie Hamilton, but they, it'll be... There's a few other guys they're going to need to extend too. One being Andrei Svechnikov, who put up almost a point per game in the regular season. Only played 68 games, but 61 points, 24 goals. I mean, certainly would have gotten 30 goals. I think you expect him to take another step forward. Possibly he's right at that point per game. He's in that 30 to 40 goal mark. You got to expect that he's going to make $6-ish million a year. So, there's lots to consider. And I really think he is probably one of the most underrated young players coming into this season. Like, he's proven that he can score. He's proven that he can play. And he kind of is forgotten about. I mean, in general, Carolina's forgotten about. But Svechnikov in particular, when you're talking about, all these younger guys coming up, I think he's somebody who maybe gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, and he certainly should not be, because he could end up being, the best player on this team, even more effective than Sebastian Aho when all is said and done.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I still think Aho is the guy when it comes to this offense. Everything I think goes through him, both from an offensive perspective and a defensive perspective, but. Svechnikov he's that exciting piece, that showstopper. He's that flash that this team, really could use a little bit more of. And again, I think you're absolutely right about it. He's going to be another guy who takes a step forward, another young kid who's kind of going to go under the radar because, like you said, Carolina doesn't get a lot of, attention in terms of an exciting team. They're no, Toronto. They're no market like the New York Rangers. So again, a lot of people just sort of forget about Carolina because again, they're not going to score and win games like, for example, like the Maple Leafs 7-4, 7-3. They're going to beat you 3-1, 2-1, and then there'll be those random nights where they can put up 5 or 6 goals, no problem. But again, I think obviously if I'm Carolina, the priority is Svechnikov, getting him re-signed. Whether that's $6-7 million to a short or long-term deal, and then of course I think you got to go back to Hamilton at that point, see what kind of money you have left over because. Again, this is a team that, while outside of Svechnikov and Hamilton, there's really no other big name players that they need to re-sign. So,
they've got $28 million in projected cap space for next year, but no goalie signed.
Right, and that's the other thing, right? I want to talk about too, because I think, both these goalies are going to be not necessarily saying that hey they want to go out and be. The starter again next year, or they're looking to earn that contract, but I think they're looking to say, hey, I can still hang around and be a 1B or potentially, a stopgap starter for you for, even another 3-4 years while, you figure out the goaltending situation because Nedeljkovic, who they have in the minors right now, I'm not so sure if he's going to be the future net for this team. And, again, he's only 24, might prove me wrong, but, if I have to look at any one of these goaltenders right now, I think Mrazek would be the guy who they could look at and say, okay, we could, at 28 years old, he could still be a viable number 1A, 1B type goaltender for you for another 3-4 years.
Yeah, I think Mrazek is certainly got to be the option you're looking at right now.
Right.
I mean, he had a great playoff, despite Carolina, of course, lost, but he had a really nice playoff. He played well, .929 save percentage. I mean, he isn't a guy that's going to probably steal you a series, but he's not really somebody who's going to lose you one either.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's
pretty relatively steady, despite a kind of a lackluster regular season. Just a .905 save percentage, but some of that is just he still did pretty well despite a lower save percentage, but still he was still winning games, which is an important part of that position as well.
Right. And I think that's the thing too. You want a guy that not necessarily you're worried about all the time back there. And I think Mrazek does add a little stability, especially because, they're spending all their money on defense right now. They're spending a lot of their money on their top forward guys. And so, if you can save a couple bucks, have a goaltender who's, relatively inexpensive in terms of starter money and yet still be very reliable, that's an ideal situation. I think a lot of teams would love to have. And so, getting Mrazek, to have another good season, and if you can maybe re-sign him for 2 or 3 years around $3-4 million again, that would just be that would just be a perfect situation for Carolina.
Okay, we will come when we come back at the very end after we go through every team. We'll drop in our playoff teams, but I think it's safe to say that Carolina is definitely on that playoff bubble. in this division, they're one of the favorites. But we'll come back and we'll give our standings prediction for this division. Let's go with the Chicago Blackhawks, who had I'll just say a tumultuous offseason. Just kind of, you don't have to look further than Brendan Saad being dealt to the Colorado Avalanche for Nikita Zadorov. Really just the signing rights. Then is Nikita Zadorov and then Anton Lindholm. And Zadorov signed a 1-year, $3.2 million deal. The Blackhawks kind of just began to take apart their team. Colin Delia, Malcolm Subban are your 1A, 1B, spending $1.85 million on their goaltending position right now.
Jeez.
They obviously still have Taves and Kane and Alex DeBrincat, and they had some of their younger guys like Kirby Dach and Dylan Strome, who is still not re-signed, playing pretty well in the playoffs, especially. And Adam Boqvist will certainly be somebody who they'll look upon to have a growth type of season here in his second year. But the Chicago team, I think for the most part, has kind of taken themselves apart. And of course, Taves and Kane unhappy about that. This is going to be a weird year because it seemed like they took a step forward when they beat the Edmonton Oilers in that preliminary round and went to the playoffs and actually had a pretty nice little run there. And now it's just kind of looks like they're pulling it like a New York Rangers style. Like, we need to retool and we're just going to be bad. Like, we didn't really plan on being good last year.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny to me because I think, goaltending is always like, if you don't have a goaltender, you don't have anything. Let's just be perfectly honest about that, in my opinion, because you could be missing an elite center, you could be missing top line guys, but if you have decent goaltending, you can still sort of compete, right, for bubble positions. But I think they pretty much made their mark when they said, okay, see ya, Corey Crawford, bye, Robin Leonard. We're not dealing with either one of you guys, and we're going to go spend, like you said, $1.85 million on goaltending. That basically is the storyline right there. That you're saying we're rebuilding. We're not touching. We're not expecting to be very competitive. And I think especially with Taves and Kane being 32 years each, still playing at the top of their game, this is the opportunity if you're Chicago to be able to get value back in trading these guys. Because don't get me wrong, even though they're in their young 30s, usually a lot of teams they get scared about shelling out big trade packages for guys that are this expensive, still with 3 years left on their contracts. But even in their 30s, guys they expect guys to basically slow down at this point. Kane is one of those guys I don't really see ever doing that. But the way Jonathan Taves plays, maybe you could see that happening here soon. But regardless, I think now's the time if you're Chicago to unload these guys if you're looking to rebuild. But I understand from a Taves and Kane perspective again too. That would you're still expecting to be competitive. They even a couple years removed, they were still a pretty decent team. And if you go in there and get a decent goaltender, you could still be competitive.
Yeah, it reminds me of the 2014-15 Buffalo Sabres when they had Jonas Enroth, Michael Neuwirth, and Anders Lindback as their goaltenders, and it was just a total dumpster fire. Granted, that team's leading scorer was Tyler Ennis and Matt Molson and Brian Giunta. So definitely not the same amount of talent up front as the Chicago Blackhawks have right now. That's what's so unusual about this, is that you're trying to rebuild with Kane, Taves, DeBrincat up front, along with Dylan Strome, who looks like he could actually turn into a decent player. It just seems weird to do that, but then also you're rebuilding without them on board. It's pretty clear that Kane and Taves are not on board to rebuild. They want to win.
Oh no, absolutely, and it's not like, I mean, don't get me wrong. If your two top guys are not on board with this, it's clear that, I mean, I hate to say it, but they've got to go, right? If you want to make this rebuild happen, you've got to get rid of these guys. But to me, again, too, it's still disturbing that they want to go through rebuild, because I think for any team to be successful in a rebuild, you have to have still some established talent up front and some young pieces that are still making that transition to where in a couple of years you can still be competitive with both of them. And I think they have that right now with guys like Dylan Strome, Kirby Dach, DeBrincat, guys that can still make their mark while you have Taves and Kane still able to produce. Obviously the back end's a little bit of a different story. You've got Adam Boquist, Duncan Keith is still serviceable, but outside of that, they really don't have a ton of talent back there. So, I mean, if they had just gone out maybe this offseason and, spent a couple bucks on goaltending, then it would be a whole different story.
Yeah, it's strange. It seems strange. They're going to be a middling team again, rather than just attempt to make the playoffs, because you're already a middling team. There's just no way you're not going to be decent with Kane and Taves. It's just That's just it. The Blackhawks are definitely a strange doing it a strange way, and maybe they go out and they bring in some goaltender here.
Yeah, Craig Anderson's still available.
No, he actually just
Jimmy
signed.
Howard.
Craig Anderson
really?
just signed, I believe, with Washington is what I just saw. As I was getting ready for the show, I saw something pop up. Craig Anderson signed somewhere, so I'll.
Oh, good. I mean, he's still a very serviceable goaltender.
Yes, he signed with the Capitals to a PTO.
Good.
A PTO though.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's still expected.
So he could go somewhere else.
Yeah, he could, but I think Samsonov would still be looking to have somebody else who can still handle 30, 40 games with him. So that's a good deal for me.
Yeah. Okay, let's go Columbus Blue Jackets. This is a team that I think everyone assumed would take a big step backwards after losing Panarin and of course, all the deadline players that they brought in, like Duchesne. I think we thought this would be kind of the end of the Blue Jackets. Possibly Tortorella would be forced to move on because they just wouldn't look good anymore, and he kind of wears on people. But instead, kind of the opposite happened. They rallied around the fact that they didn't have a star player, and they made things happen. And this team goes, and granted they do lose to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round of the playoffs, but they beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in the preliminary round. And I don't look at this team and say that they got worse over the offseason. They didn't particularly do much to make themselves better. I don't think that bringing in Mikko Koivu was much of a needle pusher, but you would expect Pierre-Luc Dubois, if he ever signs, to continue to improve. I mean, on his 49 points in 70 games, but in the playoffs, a point per game producer. I would think that he has a little bit better of a regular season this year. But this is a team that all goes through Seth Jones and Zach Werenski. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when you talk about top pairing guys, top two guys in the league in terms of defense, we talked about Carolina, right? They've got Jacob Slavin, Dougie Hamilton, and then Columbus here, they've got Werenski and Seth Jones. These two guys are phenomenal defenders. Werenski, we know he can score the goals, right? He led all defenders last year in goals scored. Seth Jones, to me, he's a Norris Trophy guy. Almost every year he's been on the ice for the last couple of years here. Clearly this is a team that, they're gonna win games not scoring too many goals, right? They're a team that maybe could desperately use a star player up front, just like Carolina, right? They've got Svechnikov. They could really use that type of electric player. And again, the offseason they brought in a guy by the name of Max Domi, right? They unload Josh Anderson to the Canadians. Again, I'm not really sure why Canada went out and instantly re-signed this guy. But, Columbus brings in a Max Domi, who's just a season removed from a 72-point campaign, and at $5.3 million at 25. This is a guy, to me, who, whether or not he's playing center or on the wing, I think obviously they're probably looking to make him their number 2 center guy. So this could be a perfect situation for him to really go out and shine because, again, Columbus desperately needs a star forward up front outside of Pierre-Luc Dubois.
Yeah. Actually, I forgot that Max Domi went to Columbus, so that's my bad. Obviously, he changes the makeup a little bit. Max Domi is kind of, I guess he's due for another good season because next year he won't be good. But he's kind of an every other guy. But yeah, obviously he does something in terms of for their offense too. Columbus needs to score more goals if they're going to be able to compete in the playoffs long term. Really, at this point, you've got Cam Atkinson scoring you goals, and then it's really just a collection of 15 to 20 goal scorers. Like you need some guys who are really going to push the needle in terms of scoring goals, being consistent, being able to get up at near that 30 goal mark. I would think that actually, like Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think has some potential. Maybe not to put up 30 to 40, but at least in that 20 to 30 mark, which. He had 27 a couple years ago, only 18 this last year in 70 games, but to me looked a little bit better in the playoffs again. And so I would expect that this Columbus team probably still is about the same as they were last year. Like, I don't expect them to be world beaters other than the fact that they're in this pretty bad division. So maybe they, and there's some teams that they haven't gotten to play very much. Like they're going to get to play the Detroit Red Wings 7 times. That's a boost for a lot of these teams. That's for a team like Tampa Bay, Dallas, Carolina. It's almost like you're looking at playing Detroit 7 times, and you're assuming you're probably going to win 5 of those.
Sure, no, that's absolutely fair, and I think you kind of hit it right on the head there. For a team that finished 4th worst in terms of goals for, but 4th best in terms of goals against, Columbus could make a little bit of noise because, again, they get to play Detroit, they get to play Chicago, they get to play Florida, all these teams who were terrible in terms of goals against last year. And, maybe Florida out of those 3 is the team that maybe has the opportunity to improve because they still have Bobrovsky back there. But, as far as Detroit and Chicago are concerned, these are 2 teams rebuilding who Columbus could take advantage of and put up some goals, and especially for a guy like Max Domi, who, next year will be in a contract year, he could be looking to say, hey, you know what, I want to stick around here long term. I'm going to be the guy that's, you're going to look to be the go-to guy outside of Pierre-Luc Dubois, and so, that could be an opportunity for him to really make a lot of noise. Okay,
yeah, that's I think that's pretty much the Columbus Blue Jackets in a nutshell. This is a team that they could finish 1st or 2nd in this division, and I wouldn't be shocked. They could also finish towards the bottom, and you wouldn't really be that shocked. Although a team coached by John Tortorella isn't usually going to be bad, they'll just struggle to get into the playoffs. I think is probably where this team is at. But because there's so many bad teams in this division, we'll see. They might be a lock for that 4th spot. But we'll give our playoff predictions at the end here. Let's go Dallas Stars, a team that was in the Stanley Cup Finals last year. We touched on them a little bit. Maybe not expecting them to be perennial Stanley Cup finalists, but they have some fantastic players, especially on that back end. They are, when you look at the other teams in this division, the only you look at Tampa can compete on the back end with Dallas, and then I guess Nashville to a point, to some extent, Nashville can. But I think that you've got Dallas and Tampa Bay with their back end, and you're really not scared of any of these other teams in terms of total depth. Columbus, of course, has Seth Jones and Zach Werenski, but outside of that, they're average defensemen. But Dallas is just loaded back there.
Yeah, I particularly want to pay attention to a guy by the name of Miro Heiskanen, who to me was the best defenseman in the whole entire playoffs last year. And I would not be shocked. Look, 26 points in 27 games. This guy was on fire the whole playoffs. And don't be shocked if we see him at the top of the leaderboard board in terms of, points for defensemen and hear his name in the Norris Trophy conversation, because I've loved this guy's game ever since he came to the league. And I think between him and Klingberg and the rest of that defensive group they have back there, they're in great hands. And not only that, but then they've got probably the best goaltending tandem in the entire NHL.
Yes, that always helps.
Yes. And so, with young guys like Rupe Hintz, why can't I think? Goryanov. They've got a couple young guys looking to still establish themselves, to prove that last year wasn't so much of a fluke for them, but they're still going to be established players and potentially top 6 guys for this team. Not to mention guys like Ben and Pavelski, who are a little bit up there in terms of age, that, they still want to say, hey, I'm still worth the money you're paying me. It'll be interesting to see with new coaching how this team does now that everybody knows what they're about, that they can now score a couple goals and not just be a defensive 2-1, 3-2 type of team to go out and play against.
Well, all you need is for Kivi Ranta to score you another hat trick. Guy has scored 1 goal in the regular season, but he has 5 in the playoffs. So
beautiful.
It's always fun, those stories. The Dallas Stars. I think if there's anything that's going to affect them, it's just age. Like, that's the one thing that, they're more talented players. They're moving, other than Sagan, they're really moving out of their prime. So that would be the one thing that would concern me for the Stars is, do you get fall off from some of these guys? You mentioned they had really everything come together for them, but they could also have everything fall apart for them really quickly. We've seen this team kind of go up and down in the regular season, and I think when all is said and done, that is the one question mark. I do think they get into the playoffs. I'll say this for the Dallas Stars: I think they're in the playoffs for this division. There's no doubt that there are some slugs in this division, and I think that Dallas will be able to jump ship pretty easily and hop into the playoffs. But once the playoffs begin, it'll be iffy. I mean, I don't know what this long break will have done to these older players. Like, is it good for them or is it bad for them? Like, you could definitely make an argument for both, in terms of the body and being used to what it's experiencing, and will they be as fast, or will they be able to get back to where they were at? But then at the same time, maybe this is really good for them, and they're one of the teams that'll benefit. You could really look at it both ways. So I think this is a team that makes the playoffs, but I got to see them score more goals if I'm gonna, have them as a team that maybe could go on and beat Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and I want more out of Tyler Seguin this year, right? He's that one guy. He has so much potential, and every year I keep thinking, okay, this is going to be a breakout year, and so maybe this is finally the year that he does it. But again, maybe this is the year where I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Never again. Tyler Seguin is what he is at this point, and so to me, this has got to be that year where, especially like you talk about guys getting older, he's got an opportunity here playing a lot of, sluggish teams, like you said, a lot of bottom feeder teams where he's got an opportunity to really do some damage now.
All right, let's go Detroit Red Wings. These are your boys. Obviously, they're in a rebuilding phase still, but some things that you look for in this regular season. What are you looking for them to do with what they have?
Well, I mean, for Detroit, it's obvious that they're still going to be a bottom team, right? They're not going to, in my opinion, contend for a top 4 spot. I think they'll make some teams nervous. They might get pretty close to it, but ultimately I think it's best for this franchise to still finish at the bottom. They've got a lot of good young players. We talk about it, right? Dylan Larkin every year. He is going to be their top guy. Anthony Mantha re-signed. Tyler Bertuzzi is up for a new contract. So, this is going to be a prove-it year for him as well. Other young guys like Robbie Fabry, Vladdy Nemestikov, to still earn some more money, some more dollars on their next contracts. And then on the back end, Filip Hronek, he's another young Swede who, could make a lot of noise there. He handled himself very well playing against top line guys, almost 24 minutes a night. And then, of course, you've got a bunch of younger kids in the minors. Your Joseph Velenos, Evgeny Sveshnikovs, guys who maybe, these are make it or break it years for them because they've been basically bouncing, back and forth between the minors and the NHL for so long that maybe it's time to say, hey, this is where I'm going to stick at this point with the expanded rosters. But all in all, it's still a rebuild. It's still, just making small steps to be, just a little bit better. Because, again, next year they've got almost about $46 million in cap space. So they've got a lot of money to spend. They could go out and, re-sign big-name guys, for example. I mean, you've got, Jonathan Bernier's, going to be up for a new deal after this season. And, if the Wings want to go out and make a splash, they could go after a guy like Freddie Anderson, who's going to be a free agent next year. Maybe even a Tuukka Rask, who's still at 34, still has, a few years left in him. So, again, you've got opportunities there to make a splash next year, as long as they still continue on that path, because they finish at the bottom. They've got a lot of draft pieces. They've got a first rounder, 3 second rounders next year, so they could make a big splash come the draft and maybe free agency. And who knows, next year we could be talking about them being a bubble team.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
I'm overly optimistic. Let's just say that. But
Lucas Raymond hasn't signed a contract yet, has he?
No, he signed a contract, but he's playing over in Sweden right now. He's doing actually quite well over there. So he's a guy that, again, I don't think is going to be on this Detroit team. I think they'd rather just leave him over there in Europe, let him grow, let him play top-line minutes, because that's going to be best for his development. Yeah.
There's no point. But, I mean, to me, the Red Wings, they've got Darren Helm, Valtteri Filppula, Luke Glendening, Bobby Ryan, Mark Stahl, Patrick Nemeth, John Merrill, all these guys you could, and Jonathan Bernier, all these guys you could potentially flip for assets at the deadline. All of them under $4 million at least. So I think there's a strong possibility that at least 2 or 3 of those guys will go at the deadline, especially like a Bobby Ryan. I don't expect him to be here at the end of this season, but I think that they can at least acquire some more assets. I mean, when I look at the draft picks they have available for next year, yes, 3 second round, two third rounds, and then the rest of their picks other than a 7th round pick. But I think they'll load up here as we move to the deadline. So I think that's really what you can hope for, is like Bobby Ryan has a huge season. Glendening has a better season than what he had last year. If Darren Helm can put up 15 goals in 45 games or whatever, like you'd be pretty happy. And if he can stay healthy, I think you could probably flip them for some decent assets, and be in a better position in terms of the draft. Okay, let's go Florida Panthers. Let's roll through the Panthers here, who they are now without Mike Hoffman, but they add Patrick Hornqvist and Alexander Wenberg, or Venberg, as I should say. Offensively, I think those 2 players can make up for the loss of Mike Hoffman. Maybe not on the power play, but their power play is generally pretty decent. Adding Radko Gudas is never a bad thing on that back end, and of course Anton Strawman back there as well. This team they're trying to compete. I know they had Strawman last year too, but they do have a better defensive core, I think, with Gudas being added back there. And it's all about Bobrovsky. Can Bobrovsky have a halfway decent season? If he does, they'll probably be in the playoff hunt. If he doesn't, they might finish last in this division, along with Detroit.
I absolutely agree. I think he is the storyline when you talk about these Florida Panthers, because we know they've got some decent talent on the back end in terms of Ekblad and Yandel and Radko Gudas, and they've got good talent up front with Barkov, Huberdeau, Patrick Hornqvist. I particularly love the signing of Anthony Duclair. You've got a 40-point guy who has the potential to be a little bit better. I would love to see him on that top line with Barkov and Huberdeau, because that little bit of grit he brings to it, and that scoring touch at $1.7 million is amazing. So again, he's going to be another, in another prove it type year to get a long-term deal. And so this could be a team that maybe fits for him long-term. But again, it all boils down to Bobrovsky, right? Can he stop the puck? And I think, you looked at his numbers last year. This team in terms of goals for was not so hot, right? They were, even though they were kind of, I guess they were up there in terms of goals for, they scored, but goals against is the concern. And when you finish fourth worst in the league in terms of goals against behind teams or, in front of teams like Detroit, Ottawa, and New Jersey, who just, again, are bottom feeder teams rebuilding, Florida's not supposed to be a rebuild here. So, when you've got that kind of, open for business type net, it doesn't speak well. And especially with the coaching staff they have with Coach Q there, I think they'll figure out a way to get it turned around, I believe here.
Yeah, one other acquisition to not write off is Nudi Vara coming from Columbus. Just really, I think Columbus just couldn't afford to hold on to him and had a gluttony of defensemen back there that were all relatively the same. I think that he played pretty well in the playoffs for Columbus and should be a pretty good addition for the Panthers too. So
yeah, absolutely. They've got depth at D, and hopefully that translates into that the goaltending maybe can stop the few pucks that he's seeing back there. So, again, Bobrovsky's contract is still looming. It's $10 million for quite a while. So he's got to get it turned around now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that you're hoping for the Panthers is that some of their draft picks will actually move on into the top roster. Like, can we see some of these higher end guys like an Owen Tippett, who was taken a few years ago, had a good season last year for the Springfield Thunderbirds in the AHL, 40 points in 46 games. You've got Alexei Hopeniemi. Can any of these guys come in and make the team? Which Hopeniemi is playing for Modo right now. So I don't know if he's actually coming over for training camp, but it'll be, that can be a big wild card. Florida has picked pretty high in the draft and has made some good picks. I mean, at least on paper they've made some good picks. Can these guys now come up, make the team, and make an impact? Which really, when you look at this roster outside of Huberdeau and Barkov, you look at it and you go, yeah, I mean, where's the high end talent coming from the draft? And Ekblad, of course, on the back end, but everyone else has just kind of been brought in, or guys who've been drafted by them, but they're not exactly high end guys, like a Mackenzie Weegar. Yeah, he's taken in the 7th round. He's a decent defenseman, but he's not doing anything too crazy for you.
Right.
Where is the Owen Tippetts who are supposed to be able to come in and be a goal scorer for you?
Right. And you talk about wild cards too. Another one for me with this Florida team is Alexander Wennberg. He signed a 1-year prove-it deal with them. He'll get an opportunity to be your second or third line center here, especially with Trocheck and Haula gone. They're looking at him to say, okay, we want you to get back to that 50-point year that you were at, a few seasons ago in Columbus. And, if they can get pretty close production to that, then I think they'd be pretty happy. And hopefully, for Wennberg too, he's got to look to turn his career around at this point, because at 26, this is that point for a forward where you're like, okay, this is what you're going to be moving forward.
Yeah, either you're going to figure it out or you're going to be gone. Speaking of Eric Haula, the Nashville Predators brought him in to basically a 1-year. He's got 1 year, $1.75 million deal, and this team is a team that needs to figure it out. I mean, they've got Michael Granlund for another year. They've got Matt Duchene signed to this fatty $8 million a year deal. They bring in Brad Richardson, who has been pretty good for the Arizona Coyotes. This team has to figure it out right here, right now. I don't see, now that Kyle Turris is gone, you don't have that as an excuse. I don't see this team beyond this year. If they go and they don't make the playoffs or they lose in the first round again, I don't see how you can keep this team together.
No, I agree. And you know what? They brought in a new coach last year, John Hines, midway through the season. So now you've had that off season, right? You've had that time to really figure out what you're going to do with this roster, how you're going to use guys, what kind of system you really want to install, and what works best for your group of forwards and defensemen here. And if it doesn't work this year, I agree. I think you have to, because they've been riding guys like Johansson, Philip Forsberg for so long that I think it's time to make it or break it, right? Not necessarily they have to make it to the Stanley Cup Finals, but I want to see them win a round or two in the playoffs and make a little bit of noise, because If you come in and especially if you don't even make the playoffs in this division, I think that's even more alarming. I think they have to make the playoffs, especially with, 3 teams at the bottom, behind them. I think they have to hit at least that number 4 spot there. But, again, they've got good talent up front, guys who have that potential to be difference makers with Johansson, Duchesne, Forsberg, Victor Arvidsson. And then when you look at the back end, Yossi and Ellis, these are 2 elite guys at their position. And they've got another younger kid, Dante Fabro, who's been coming up. He's looking pretty good. He could elevate his game at 22 years old and be another difference maker on that back end. And then you've got UC Saros, who's basically in a position now with Pekka Rinne having such a lackluster season last year, where he's got to come in and say, hey, this is my team, I'm taking it over, and you're going to give me a big extension after this year, because he's an RFA, and he wants to prove, with Rinne's contract being up after this year, that he's going to take the ball and run with it.
Yeah, we'll see if John Hines can get these 4 guys going. I mean, Brian Johansson, Matt Duchesne, Philip Forsberg, Victor Arvidsson, they accounted for 63 goals last year. They're 4 highest paid forwards. 63 goals. I mean, that's what
not good enough.
It's an average of just over 15 goals per player. That's a joke. That's an absolute joke. And I know it's only in 68 games. So we'll say, okay, it's an average of like 19 goals per over the course of an 82 game season. But it's more disappointing. Well.
No, their top point getter was Roman Yossi, 65 points in 69 games, which is great. And when you're paying him $9 million, you kind of expect production like that. But he was almost 20 points better than the next highest guy, Philip Forsberg, at 48 points. That's unacceptable from a forward position. You have to have – I'm not saying your top point getter has to be a forward, because we've seen teams be successful with their defenseman being their best point getter. But I think there can't be that sort of separation between your top forward and top defenseman.
Matt Duchesne and Ryan Johansson are the 2 most overpaid players in the NHL, and they're both on the same team. Find me a more like a player who is more overpaid than the 2 of those guys. The 2 of those guys together put up 78 points.
Yeah, how much is Nashville kicking themselves? I'd rather be giving Seth Jones that $8 million right now.
Yeah. So, good job trading him away. That is where you have those 4 guys. They have to be able to figure this out. They need to, if they don't all have in a 56 game season, if they don't all have over 40 points, I think you're in trouble if you're Nashville. We'll see what John Hines can do. John Hines did some magic his first year in New Jersey when he took a team that was not good to the playoffs. This Nashville team has talent. Can he kind of grind it out of some of these guys and get their offense going? Hopefully with the new system he can. Otherwise Nashville is probably going to have to there's going to be a lot of potential rebuilding because David Poile isn't getting any younger, and eventually he's going to have to turn the reins over to someone else. I think he's 70 something, 75 maybe.
Yeah, he's up there.
All right, last team, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Stanley Cup champions. By the way, David Poile is 70. So sorry to give you those extra 5 years, Dave. Didn't mean to be 70 though, which is definitely up there for a general manager in the league. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they just re-signed Anthony Cirelli to a 3-year, $4.8 million deal, and they seem to have been able to keep this team together for the most part, other than of course Nikita Kucherov, who is out for the entire regular season. I don't know why he just decided to get hip surgery, but hey, you've had what, 5 months off, and you get surgery 5 months later. That seems weird, but Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, these guys who they acquired at the deadline still have an extra year left on their deal, and Patrick Maroon's here for another 2 years, so that means that the Lightning win the Cup 2 years in a row, or 3 years in a row, right? Because he just wins the Cup everywhere he goes now.
Yeah, boy, I got to say, I love that they have these guys, Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, still signed for another year because, again, those assets are paying off. And you're seeing it now because, again, when you lose a superstar like Nikita Kucherov, one of the top guys in the league, you now need that depth a little bit more. And one of the reasons for, Tampa Bay's success in the playoffs last year was this third line pairing with Yanni Gourde, Goudreau, and Coleman. They were just so effective. And I think, if you're Tampa, especially now, being able to keep the band together because Kucherov's money's coming off the books on LTIR, you get an opportunity for some of these depth guys to shine a little bit more longer term. And so I think not only that, I think, if you get Steven Stamkos back, who, again, another guy who was on IR.
That's what you need is Stamkos. If he can play and,
Yes.
and he's alive for the whole regular season, then you're in good shape, because you didn't have him during the playoff run, and you at least get him back. So you kind of swap Stamkos for Kucherov, which isn't a perfect 1-for-1, but it certainly is better than not having either of them.
Right. Exactly. It's better than any other team could probably do right now.
Sure.
But I think in terms of, these depth guys, not only do they get to maybe, showcase these guys a little bit more, not necessarily for deadline acquisitions, but I think longer term deadline or, maybe say free agency, draft day trades, guys like Tyler Johnson, Anthony Cirelli, maybe guys, Andre Palatz, those guys that maybe you need to unload, for next season, because again, when Kucherov comes back, I don't expect the cap the needle to move on that very much. You have to move one of these guys off your books, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's gonna probably be Tyler Johnson is my guess. But.
Right, more than likely. But again, this is a year where now you get an opportunity for Tyler Johnson, right? For a guy like Tyler Johnson or Killorn to play a little bit more and say, hey, these guys still have, NHL years left in the tank with these deals that are, extended beyond this season. So gives them an opportunity to showcase them so maybe they can move one in the offseason.
Okay, let's do our predictions for the playoffs. Who do you have in the Central Division making the playoffs?
Well, obviously, I think the team we just talked about, Tampa Bay, I think they're the elite of the elite when it comes to this division. Beyond that, I love Carolina. I think they have an opportunity here, to really make some noise. Outside of that, the next two spots, I think, are going to be up in the air. There's going to be 4 teams that I think have an opportunity to compete. Ultimately, though, I think Columbus gets in, and I think Dallas gets in.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when you go Tampa, Carolina, Dallas, and Columbus, it means you're leaving out Nashville and Florida, which Florida, okay, Nashville's really the one team where you're like, wow, they're not going to make the playoffs. I definitely think Tampa Bay finishes 1. I think that the Nashville Predators, I think they're going to figure this out. I think that John Hines is going to come in and he's going to open this team up a lot. And I think that'll be good for Pekka Rinne. I think that you'll get both Rinne and Saros splitting time, and I think that it'll be good for them to get more action. Some goalies just play better with more shots against them, and I think Rinne is one of them. I think that the Predators actually finish in either the 2 or 3. I think that the Carolina Hurricanes do make the playoffs, and it's got to be the Dallas Stars. I mean, there's just too much talent there for them not to make the playoffs. I think the Columbus Blue Jackets will take a little bit of a step back, and that leaves Columbus, Chicago, Florida, and Detroit outside of the playoffs. So I guess my one difference is Nashville getting in and Columbus not.
Okay, yeah, I love it. I do think, I think Detroit, Chicago, they're at the bottom of this division. But I do think between, like I said, I had Florida and Nashville just on the outside looking in. I think if there's any one team, like you said, Columbus, I do agree. They are a team that could take a step back, and one of those other 2 teams, Nashville or Florida, could easily get in because I don't think there's going to be many points separating these 3 teams right there at that 4, 5, and 6 spot.
Yeah, and I see a scenario where Dallas doesn't make the playoffs if what happened to them last year where they got everyone going, if no one can get going in the regular season. Like I said, this whole thing can fall apart really fast if you have a bad stretch. And the Stars, not always the most consistent team last year in the regular season. Whereas Carolina, man, in the regular season, I could see them competing for the top spot in this division with Tampa. Like Tampa Bay, I think, is at this point where they're like, all right, the regular season is what it is. We don't need to go balls out. We want to win the cup. So I think that Tampa Bay, while they are the best team in this division, they might not finish at the top. They might finish 2. But I think Carolina would be my wild card for winning this division if it's not Tampa.
Yeah, I love it. And for Dallas, too, like you said, there could be that opportunity. Obviously Ben Bishop has never had consistent health. He's never finished a whole entire season really that often. And if he,
fortunately for him, this one's really short.
Right. And if he and Khudobin somehow, manage to, just have mediocre seasons, and the team that in front of him historically hasn't scored that much, getting older, man, if they, you could see that scenario happening, and then they could easily fall.
Yeah. It'll be fun to watch. All right. We'll wrap this, and the next division that we jump into, what do we think? The East? You want to do the East?
Yeah, let's do the big dogs here.
The big dogs. All right, we'll do the East next on our on the next show. Find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Let us know what you think. Let us know your potential Central Division playoff contenders, and we'll talk to you guys very soon. Enjoy the remainder of 2020. Just maybe wash it away with a lot of drinks. We'll talk to you guys soon.